welcome to another edition of 805 Sports Talk. And we've had an interesting week here at the Santa Maria Times. Not a whole lot to cover, with the Thomas Fire pretty much wiping out all Los Padres League play, all of the tournaments scheduled for later this week, last week. So it's been a little hectic here, for the area teams, administrators trying to find games, reschedule games, make up games. We saw Rigetti and Cabrillo girls basketball teams last week just said, hey, our tournament got canceled, let's just play. So we've had a lot of that this week, last week. Hopefully things will kind of steady. Hopefully they'll be able to bat that fire down and get it contained. So we'll keep an eye on that. But it's been a very interesting week with us. Not a whole lot to cover, but we do have quite a bit to talk about, and we're going to start with how local administrators, especially the LPL, decided to handle the poor air quality, just wiping out their schedule this week. Lorenzo, I'll start with you. Have you ever experienced something like that, as an athlete or covering sports, where they just wipe out a whole week of play because of a fire or maybe flooding or rains or anything like that? Have you ever seen something like that?
Never before. I think if anything I could think of back in '97, I want to say, when El Nino hit this area, and we were just slammed with rain, and there was a lot of power outages. But I don't remember what kind of impact that had on the sports landscape, because it was around the holiday season. But this one, a brush fire in December, you just don't see that coming. And I think everybody did the right thing, especially down in the southern areas with Lompoc, Kissimmee, and Nez, to ensure that there was no school, no outdoor events, also no sporting events, just rescheduled for January. I think they did the right thing, because health and breathing fresh air, that takes a lot of priority.
Do you think we're going to see any impact or lasting effects on the athletes after this? Their schedule's going to be a little bit different moving forward, probably losing some practice time. I think a lot of teams who are going to play in tournaments, they probably aren't going to make those games up, so they're probably going to have fewer games, I would assume. Do you think there's going to be some lasting effects?
It's interesting you bring that up, because I did have a conversation about a couple days ago when I did the story on the Thomas Fire and its impact. CJ Simmons brought this up at Cabrillo. That Carpinteria tournament, it could have an impact on their CIF ranking because of the number of games they lose out on, and plus the level of competition they were going against. So there was that dilemma on Simmons' end. So, and with soccer, one of the big matchups that was scheduled for this week was Santa Maria boys soccer going against Cabrillo. And those from last year, those were the two best teams in the LPL. So there's no telling if and when that's going to get made up. But as far as tournament play is concerned, it puts a damper on not only the non-league stuff, but you also have to wonder, how active are guys' legs, how active are teams' legs with this long layover.
All right, Kenny, moving to you. Have you ever experienced something like this? Maybe with rain, we have to deal with postponements and that, and rainouts and stuff, but this is kind of like a smoke out almost. So the week, pretty much everything's wiped out. Have you ever experienced something like this covering, sports in the area?
Never anything close to more than half the month for most of the league being wiped out. They did the right thing. They had no choice. I don't know what the air quality is like in Central Harbor today. Hopefully it has eased. There are a few teams, I think, who are not from the Los Padres League who were scheduled to go down that way, towards Santa Barbara way, for tournaments. I'm not sure that's going to happen. I haven't heard one way or the other, but from what I can gather, next week is supposed to be better than this week for the firefighters as far as conditions and so forth. So maybe that can still happen. Unfortunately, I can't see how that won't have some sort of effect on the athletes. It has just thrown their routine way off.
Yeah, last I heard, we're taping this on Wednesday. The Thomas Fire was about 236,000 acres, something like that, about 20% containment, though they are making some inroads into stopping that thing, but the winds could change and maybe that could increase. So hopefully not. Hopefully, they do get that containment number up and everything can kind of settle back down to a little bit of normal here on the Central Coast. Now, Elliot, talking to you, do you think the administrators handled everything? Think that was a good call from the LPL guys to just say, we're not going to try to get anything in this week? There were some big soccer or basketball games and stuff scheduled this week, but they decided to push all that stuff back to January. How do you think they handled that?
Safety first. while there are no flames right here, the air quality is just awful. Even today, the sun is out, but you can still see ash floating down. It's not as like a blanket the way it was a few days ago. We had a couple of days where you couldn't see the sun, and yet there weren't clouds in the sky. It was just a cloud of ash. And so, you know, for health reasons, better to be safe than sorry. You know, you can always play the games. If you can't make them up, you can't make them up. But better to make sure that you know, this kind of stuff can affect your lungs so badly. And I have COPD, so I have to worry about these kinds of things for myself. The young kids don't have that, but they don't need to get it because they're playing outside or even playing in some of these gyms, because you can't filter the air properly with that stuff. So I think it was the right call. Better to play a fewer games than to risk anybody's health. So, and not just the kids, but the fans coming out are just sitting there breathing that stuff, the coaches, the officials. So yeah, better to push it back or just cancel it. And you know, we saw a couple teams like Rigetti and Cabrillo reschedule against each other up here before the air really got bad up here. And if they can make up a few games, fine. You know, there's a flip side to this too. Some of these boys basketball teams from successful football schools, they have to get their football players into basketball shape, and now they're going to actually get some time to do that, where otherwise they just have to go right from the football uniforms to the basketball uniforms, get out on the court, and it's a different game. You're running back and forth without the kind of breaks where in football you do a play, you get up, you reset. So, and you know, and it's a different game with it running down and out, blocking interior. You don't have to do that, but you have to post up and you know, dribble and drive and those things. So I think it gives those kids a little bit of a chance to get their legs under them and get into the new game mode. But that's only a few of the kids, but they'll benefit from that, I think. But I think it was the right call. You know, we see rainouts regularly in the winter, sometimes in the spring, and then they reschedule it for a couple of days later or the next week. But this was just too great a health risk, so I think they made the right call.
It's interesting you bring that up about the football guys, fresh legs. This benefits Lompoc High boys basketball because predominantly Paul Tarona's first roster is led by football guys. I mean, Shamar Savage, Ruben Cortez, Ryan Morgan. The list goes on, so I feel like this time could definitely benefit them.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking of, and not just them, but little schools like Valley Christian and Orchid Academy. They rely heavily on 2 and 3 sport athletes that move from one to the next to the next. But even you look at Rigetti and Santa Maria, there'll be kids moving over, if not football to basketball. A bunch of them go to soccer. So, and that's all outdoors, and boy, those kids are running up and down nonstop, and they're breathing hard, and they're breathing that air, and better to let the air clear, because you can't put up a big fan and just clear the air. It's, you know, it's got to filter itself out naturally, and so I think in the long run, you know, it's a few games, and better to have the kids healthy down the road than, you know, I mean, we saw tragically with 9/11, the people went in there and they did all kinds of things and then came up with lung problems years later. You don't want to risk that with anybody. So, yeah, I think they made the right call. It'll be interesting to see how it all gets made up. I know a bunch of the games have been rescheduled for after the first of the year. Hopefully everything will have settled down by then. They'll have the fire under control. They say it's going to burn till Christmas easily, so even after the first of the year it might be a concern. So that's something we'll be all watching, as will our news side.
So the football season is over, but you know, still a lot of big decisions to be made by area high school football players, and we'll move on to Taua. You know, he announced that he'll be making his decision at the Polynesian Bowl. Can you give us a kind of update on what Taua is thinking? What do you think is kind of going through his mind? Who are some schools that he's really, you know, kind of focusing on at this point as it kind of winds down? We've been following this for 3 or 4 years, probably the top recruit in our coverage area, and it's getting closer to that time where he's going to make that announcement. What's kind of the process he's working through?
Well, I spoke to his father. So Iowa State, Utah State, Nevada, and then the sleeper school, from what he calls, is San Diego State. So those 4 are officially in the running now. Out of all the 4 schools, I feel like the one that we should keep a close eye on is Iowa State, and there's a number of reasons for it. His last official visit was at Ames, Iowa. Ames happens to have one of the fastest growing Polynesian populations in America. And you saw the season the Cyclones had. I mean, it's one thing to go 7-5, but 2 of those victories were against top 10 opponents, Oklahoma and TCU. So Iowa State, to me, right now is that front runner, but I won't be shocked if San Diego State makes a late dash, especially with the success that the Aztecs have had with smaller running backs. I mean, Rashad Penny's been doing well over there. Same thing with Danielle Pumphrey a few years back. So, it could, I feel like that in the next coming weeks, maybe until the Polynesian Bowl, it could come down to those 2 schools.
And Nevada might count on the fact that his older brother went there.
And he's on the staff.
And so there's always that too. You just never know what's going to enter into his final decision. Does he want to hang out with his older brother? Could ease the transition to college? Does he want to go to someplace like San Diego State? Warm weather, Ames, Iowa, it can be brutal. It does have a growing Polynesian community, but San Diego State's close to home, warm weather, and a growing program. He could be a part of something that becomes big. So I'm thinking the only one that might be out of the mix is Utah State, but he'll keep us guessing.
Yeah, Taua did have some Pac-12 offers, but he's looking. These are kind of Mountain West schools, and obviously Iowa State being in the Big 12. Do you think there's something he doesn't want to be in the Pac-12? His brother's at UCLA. You would think that's kind of a premier location for us out here on the West Coast. The Pac-12 is kind of the premier conference, but it seems like he's kind of interested in some different schools.
I don't know what really happened with Cal, but I guess maybe like Taua's heart is leaning towards running the football instead of playing defense. And I feel like with these 4 schools, I mean, at a lot of places, I think even at Utah State, he can actually, if running back doesn't work out, he can help the defense easily. But, I mean, I guess with Cal, I don't know what really materialized there. Washington State was actually his very first offer, but, I mean, I think that was through the previous regime, not through Mike Leach. So who's to say that offer was still standing? And another thing to keep in mind, Hawaii offered him as well. And Hawaii's not in the mix either.
Yeah, I was kind of, didn't think Iowa State would really have much of a chance, but the season they put together, it seems like there's a lot of excitement brewing around that program. I think they extended their coach, David Montgomery. Their running back was really one of the premier running backs. So I think, Iowa State probably has taken it up another notch.
I will say this about Iowa State as well. They've actually done well with California guys. I mean, Kamari Moya Cotton and Sheldon Croney are Bakersfield guys doing well at Iowa State. Keep in mind, Seneca Wallace, who was probably the most revered Cyclone of all time, he was from Sacramento. So
Garrett Owens, he transferred over there from Oregon State.
Yeah, quick note on the all-league stuff. Taua was named the LPL MVP, co-MVP this year with Shamar Savage. And I think that's the 3rd year in a row Taua has been the LPL MVP. You don't see that too often or at all. So congrats to Taua making that 3 years in a row, and Shamar as well landing that. I think that was a good choice. I don't have any problems with that, although we do usually like to see the singular MVP for that, but that was cool. I was a little bit surprised Caleb Thomas is a Pac-5 League MVP. Not anything to do with Caleb, but for Rigetti being a 3rd place team, it's almost always the best player on the championship winning team that lands the league MVP. So I was a little surprised there, but I think Thomas had a great season, definitely worthy, and that just shows you how highly thought of a lot of the coaches thought of him to put him a defensive player mostly as MVP. You don't see that a whole lot. And then over in the Northern League, no surprise at all, Blake Truitt of Santa Maria, Northern League MVP. That was probably the biggest no-brainer that we've ever seen, choosing league MVPs. Lorenzo, what are your thoughts on the all-league choices? Do you think Taua and Shamar was a good choice over there for the LPL? Anything that stood out to you?
Definitely Taua and Shamar, they are deserving. I mean, they were the cornerstones all season long in the LPL. Although you could kind of argue that Dustin Gregg put together a very fine year at San Ynez, but I mean, I feel like had San Ynez made a playoff run, maybe win the league, the edge would have gone to Gregg, but no issue with the LPL. Definitely no issue with Blake Truitt. I mean, there's no way Santa Maria would have put together the season it had if it weren't for Truitt's big plays. I'm kind of with you about Caleb Thomas. I mean, I like his game, but I guess nobody from Paso Robles was even considered. And we saw Paso Robles turn its season around after that rough start and the coaching fallout.
But their quarterback, who, if he'd played a full season, might have easily won the MVP. He didn't play a full season, and they don't often vote to give a guy that played the last half of the season the MVP for, they want it to be a full season's body of work. So that was my thought, that was what was working against Paso. And if you look at the other teams in the league, who really stood out?
Maybe James Gilman from Aurora.
Yeah, he would be the only other one.
Yeah, he went just over 1,000 yards. I mean, that's good, but MVP stuff, it's generally
Caleb was a cornerstone. Let's be clear. Caleb was a cornerstone, especially on that defense. And I mean, when we look back at that Santa Maria game, he was flat out dominant, especially with stop. He was one of the few guys who literally had that option offense in check.
And look at the way they turned their season around. Gilmet was expected to run probably for more than 1,000 yards, for like 1,800. So they may have looked at it and said, that's really a down year, 1,000 yards at that school. But Thomas led that team to the playoffs. A one-win team that turned its season around in 1 year. Ed Herman was not going to get Player of the Year, but he helped, and his coaches helped turn that team around, and Thomas was the big beneficiary and a big reason why. So I think they rewarded him for that.
We talked about Taua in his recruiting period. I would keep a close eye on Thomas for the 2019 class. I think Rigetti hasn't had a lineman like this since the days of Matt Holt, who went on to Fresno State.
Yeah, he's an interesting prospect, I think, because I think he does have the size, but he seems like he could make an impact on either side of the ball. Maybe I don't know if he can be refined enough in technique to be a really Division I offensive lineman, but he definitely gets after it on the defensive side of the ball. So I think you're right. He could be an interesting prospect. He still has his senior season in front of him. So, we do lose quite a bit of talent here on the Central Coast with the senior class, but there's definitely a whole lot coming back, and I think Thomas is going to kind of lead that group. Leandre Coleman, I think, could be a front runner for LPL MVP next season, so I think we still have a lot of talent coming back, even though
I'll have a list soon, so I'll have that list pretty soon.
But we're going to see Santa Maria's going to lose a lot to graduation.
St. Joseph as well.
St. Joe, they had, St. Joe had candidates, but Taua and Shamar Savage just were so dominant that the St. Joe candidates fell by the wayside. But Dino Maldonado had a great year. He had some receivers that had great years, but they just didn't measure up to what Lompoc did. But St. Joe's going to lose those guys, so there's going to be a lot of turnover for everybody, including Orchid Academy had its best shot ever.
St. Inez as well.
St. Inez, so
a lot of teams.
But that's high school. You have to. The kids grow up and they graduate and go on to wherever, junior college, four-year college, to the workforce, to the military, and now you got to bring in the new guys. But that's one of the things you see that Andrew Jones has been able to do at Lompoc is just reload. He has a program down there starting with youth football. They keep bringing them up and they advance. And one of the things that I've commented before, that blowing people out, you start your stars in the first half, they sit in the second half, your backups get a lot of experience, but it can hurt you come playoff time because your starters got to play the whole game and then they're a little tired come the end of the game. But now he's got all those kids that have played the second half of games. They're going to move into the starting lineup and play first half next year. I don't envy anybody that has to play Lompoc, but the other teams haven't had that luxury. So there's going to be a lot of rebuilding. It's going to be an interesting summer because they do a lot of work in the summer, and fall practices. We'll have to get familiar with a whole new cast of characters.
I think that FCA All-Star game this year is going to be a lot of fun with so much senior talent. All the seniors, all the All-League guys are going to be playing in that. I think it's going to be out of Atascadero this year. I think the South or Santa Barbara County quarterback position is going to be fun because there's like Dino Maldonado's quarterback, Dustin Gregg's a quarterback, Blake Truitt's a quarterback, Xavier Nix might be in there, Darren Miller's going to be in the mix of quarterbacks. So the FCA All-Star game is going to be, I think, stacked with a lot of talent, especially from the South side, the Santa Barbara County side.
It's going to be a lot of, yes, there'll be at least as much senior talent, I think, at this particular FC All-Star game. And any I can remember in recent memory.
And we'll see. I think Taua may play in it. Who knows?
Jonathan Ramos might play.
Yeah, Shamar Savage. We'll see if those guys play. Sometimes if you have a big college commitment, you don't play in some of those games, but they might be playing in bigger games. Who knows? I think that FCA All-Star game will kind of be fun. Once the school year's over, that's going to be a fun thing to keep an eye on.
If someone's already nursing an injury, there's probably a good chance they won't play. If they're nursing an injury,
or if they're committed to school.
Committed to school, and they are nursing an injury. Yeah.
But there are some kids like the Zool twins from Santa Maria High School. They weren't looking toward playing college ball. They were looking to college, but not football. And this could be a good game for them because they don't have to worry about injury. They're going for an education first, and they're not going to. Football is an afterthought at this point.
All right, we're going to move on to Hancock basketball. Kenny, you were on hand to see the Hancock men. Lucis Cerritos, Saturday night, the Hancock women looked pretty good against COS, College of Sequoias, in the championship game of their own tournament. How would you kind of sum up the state of Hancock basketball, men's and women's, from everything you saw Saturday and last week?
The women went up against the unbeaten College of Sequoias Giants, who were ranked 3rd in the state. COS looked every bit of that in the first half. Hancock, frankly, didn't look very good. Second half, Hancock showed pretty well. So, obviously, if Hancock plays the second half in its conference campaign, I'm sorry, if Hancock plays in its conference campaign the way it did in the second half, it should show pretty well. If it goes the way the first half did, could have problems. Hancock men, they were just blasted by Cerritos. I think there are a few factors there. Number one, Cerritos is good. Number two, Hancock was off for 3 weeks, and as their coach Tyson accurately, I think, said, they looked like a team that was off the 3 weeks. They didn't look like themselves. I think that game was an aberration. And once again, it's always hard for me to tell because it's how Hancock will do in conference play before conference starts, because no matter how strong or weak the team may be, I generally don't have an idea of how strong or weak the rest of the conference teams are going to be, because it's junior college. I mean, it's not like high school where you have 4 years to build a program. It's 2 years and they're gone, maybe 1 year and they're gone. So these junior college coaches they're constantly have to try to bring a new stream of people in. It's just a different game.
All right, Lorenzo, on last Thursday you got to see Hancock play a Vandenberg team that was kind of cool, and then on Friday you got to see the Cabrillo-Rigetti girls basketball game. I think a lot of people were interested in that. They played in the semifinals, or quarterfinals 2 years ago, and they've been clearly, I think, the top 2 girls basketball programs in the area. They were both supposed to play in the Santa Barbara tournament or down south in the Gold Coast tournament. It got canceled because of the fire. So they agreed to play, and you got to see a pretty good basketball game with Cabrillo winning 43-35. What did you take away from that matchup? Cabrillo's ranked 2nd in its division this week. Rigetti was unranked. They're just 1-1. They didn't get to play in the tournament, so they didn't have many games under the belt, not enough games to be ranked. What did you see from that game?
Both teams are very stout on defense. I'll start there. I mean, I kind of anticipated that it was going to be low scoring, and sure enough it was, but it's crazy because Rigetti had a lot of opportunities to actually win this game, but one of the things that Desiree Hitch told me after the game that resonated with me was Cabrillo right now has the edge in experience. Rigetti actually is a pretty young squad, because Desiree was saying realistically she only has 6 girls back from that team from last year. Granted, one of those players is one of her cornerstones, Zane Sheckard, and Zane had a terrific game defensively against Aaron Jenkins. The problem was Jenkins had a terrific game defensively as well. So, I mean, they were just so evenly matched. But one of the other things, too, I thought was really cool was the respect that both teams have for one another. I mean, Brittany McCune went down with an injury, and you already saw the sympathy after the game from both sides. And just no trash talk. I mean, these girls pretty much know each other's strengths, and there's just a lot of mutual respect between these two. And I don't know, maybe they might meet again. We'll see. Yeah,
and it was too bad because Rigetti kind of went through that last year with Danita Astorga being injured. Rigetti, one of the top teams, probably could have made a deeper playoff run if Danita was healthy throughout the season. And then now maybe Cabrillo's going to have to go through the same type of thing, not having McCune. I think probably their second best player. probably their best rebounder behind Aaron Jenkins. So they're kind of, going down the same path that Rigetti had to go through last year.
Thing is, Jared McCune believes more in a transition game. I mean, he likes being up tempo, and he mentioned how Kiki Dow has really emerged as a three-point shooter. If Aaron Jenkins is struggling on the scoring end, Kiki Dow can help Dow from long distance. And then you've got Jessie Jenkins, who's the younger sister to Aaron, who's also starting to emerge as a freshman. So, I mean, to me, Jared has his girls in place, and his team is in pretty good shape.
Yeah,
we saw last year when Astorga went down for Rigetti that it was early enough in the season that they learned to, everybody else picked it up. Her replacements played well, and they did well. They didn't win the CIF championship, but they did well. And I think that's what Cabrillo's going to have to do this year without McCune for as long as she's out. But they still have a lot of talent on that team, but it's going to hurt having her sitting on the bench watching. And Rigetti, like you said, they're a young team, but their coach is really good, and I think she'll have them in shape when league season starts. Again, here's the problem of not being able to play a lot early in the season because tournaments are getting canceled, games are getting canceled, so that's not going to help them. They need a little bit of game time to get everybody in sync. It's different playing against your own teammates in practice than playing against the opposition, where you put out 5 people against the other guys and then you substitute in from your own side instead of those substitutes in a practice are playing on the other side of the court. So they've got to work it into game conditions, and I think they'll be all right, but they're being hurt by the lack of competition early in the season.
Unfortunately, in Cabrillo's case, if they're without Brittany McCune, I see a possibility of the same thing eventually happening to them as what happened with Gay Danita Astorga. Desiree and players did a wonderful job of adjusting without Danita on the court to win the Pac-8 League title, but Joe saw the semifinal playoff game against a good Los Angeles Marlboro team. Rigetti really needed Danita that game, and she wasn't available. And I'm afraid the same thing, there's a chance the same thing could happen as Cabrillo gets deep into the playoffs if they don't have Brittany.
Yeah, sometimes you need that player just to kind of push you over the top. Danita was kind of that girl for Rigetti, and Brittany can kind of be that girl for Cabrillo that the team can do fine. But like you said, Kenny, once you get in the postseason, everything's so close. You just have that one piece that can kind of push you over the top, and we'll see if Cabrillo can kind of make up for that without McCune, and maybe she will be able to return at some point. And I got to commend Jared McCune for continuing to coach. Knowing your daughter suffers an injury like that, it's got to be a tough thing to kind of carry on and continue to coach and do it throughout the season. So we'll see how that shakes out for Cabrillo. But Rigetti was able to bounce back from that Cabrillo loss to beat Bakersfield's Centennial 62-32. So I think the Warriors should be just fine, and Cabrillo might have proven itself to be the best team in the area. But that's all we got for this week's show. We weren't able to talk about it this week, but we'll talk about it some on next week's show. But check out Sunday's Santa Maria Times. We'll have our all-area coverage in there for the football season to see who our all-area MVP is, all-area offensive player of the year, all the top awards, coach of the year, all that stuff. It'll be out this weekend, so check out SantaMariaTimes.com online Saturday night and in Sunday's Santa Maria Times. Thank you guys for tuning in to 805 Sports Talk.